This week on Quadriga, Famine and War, the Misery of Somalia. They're exhausted, emaciated, desperate. Thousands of men, women and children fleeing from the civil war and drought in Somalia. They walk for days before reaching the refugee camps in Kenya and Ethiopia. Some international aid is getting through, but it's extremely difficult to help those left behind in Somalia. Your host this week is Terry Martin.
Hello and welcome. What can be done to stop the suffering in the Horn of Africa? Does the international relief effort have the right approach? Could there be a political solution to this humanitarian crisis? Those are some of the questions we're exploring this week on Quadriga.
Joining Terry Martin in the studio, Bastian Hartig is a freelance journalist based in Berlin. He's been reporting recently for DW-TV and just returned from an assignment covering the refugee crisis on the Somali-Ethiopian border. Mikonen Mezgina is a freelance journalist and policy analyst specializing in immigration issues. Originally from Eritrea, he came to Germany as a refugee and is now head of the Migration and Diversity Department at the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Markus Höhne is a researcher at Germany's Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology in Halle. He's written extensively about the Horn of Africa, with a particular focus on political developments in Somalia.
Sebastian Hatta, you just returned from a refugee camp on the Ethiopian-Somali border. Tell us what you learned there about this crisis.
Well, what we saw is that the situation there remains critical. The humanitarian situation. There's these camps that we were in. There's 4 of them, basically, and they're overcrowded. There's 120,000 people in these camps, which they're supposed to be probably not even half that number. And in the past month, tens of thousands of people arrived, and every day there's still hundreds of people coming across the border from Somalia, and it's extremely difficult for the aid organizations there to supply these people with what they need. For example, water is a big problem, or was a big problem when we were there. There were water shortages. The water rations had to be cut because there wasn't enough water. There weren't enough tents. We met one family who, the way it works is they come across the border, and then they're registered, and then they're in a transit camp, and they wait to be transported to one of the 4 permanent camps in the region. And this family had to wait for 2 weeks before they got a proper tent, so they had to live in a makeshift tent, and this is didn't only happen to them, it happened to a lot of people. We saw a lot of people living in very basic makeshift tents.
Sebastian, what sort of stories did you hear from the refugees that you talked to there? What ordeal had they gone through before arriving at the camp?
Well, the people we talked to, they crossed the desert basically for days, weeks, depends. And some were on donkey carts, some were lucky and they could ride on minibuses, but a lot of them walked. And obviously they lost their cattle, which is their main capital, so they arrived there with basically nothing. And they didn't have a lot to eat. One father told me he was there with his 2-year-old daughter, and he told me that for 3 days she hadn't eaten, and so she arrived at the camp. They gave her some tea, but she was extremely malnourished, and she had diarrhea, and she was in a very severe condition. So there's a lot of refugees who have this story, and it's still, even when they arrive at the camp, it's not, a lot of them haven't made it. I mean, they're happy to be there, and they're happy to get food aid and medical attention, but for a lot of them, it doesn't mean that that they've actually made it. The situation is still critical, and many children, especially children, still die every day. So
they still face an uncertain future, as it were. Making it to a refugee camp is not really the end of the road. Mikonen Mezgina, in your opinion, you've dealt with aid issues in Africa for quite some time. Why is this particular humanitarian crisis suddenly become the focus of international attention, given that these conditions are not new?
Let me just add one sentence to what you have said. It's very true, and yet we have to notice that it's the strong ones who just made it to the camps, and the weakest ones wouldn't even, just manage to go all the way through deserts, etc., etc.
Perish on the way, undocumented.
Exactly. Or even they wouldn't even begin the journey toward the refugee camps. Yes, I mean, these things didn't happen like an earthquake or just a flood. It is a history behind that. Even if it is a short history, just the international communities were successful in the last years implementing early warning systems, etc., etc. And still, the international community and the regional governments and local governments and administrations are still very hesitant to react to these early warning systems. So we have a big dilemma, just as a big gap between what we want, the knowledge we have, the know-how we have about dealing with crisis and drought and so on, and on the other side, in just putting action to stop such humanitarian crisis. And my conclusion is exactly this humanitarian crisis is a man-made humanitarian crisis rather than a drought. Yes, there was a drought. Yes, there is, this natural problem, but it's not the whole story. It's just part of the story. So we have here a humanitarian driven crisis.
So you have two key factors here. You have, first of all, the drought on the one hand that is causing crops to fail. The people are unable to feed their animals, and they are then unable to feed themselves ultimately. So you've got that on the one hand. But you say this is a man-made crisis. What do you mean with the man-made part of it?
Lack of administration, lack of, just dealing with the harvest, etc. For example, if you look into the neighboring country, Ethiopia, even in good harvest periods, people are still, just dependent on aid. So we have here a gap between managing the food situation and on the other side, coping with what's going on the ground, just growing population and the technical support, etc. So we have here a lack of strategies in dealing with food or food security, and above that, Somalia have a big problem. It is violence. It is a conflict. And this country is just primarily driven by violence, and all those clans or group of people who have some kind of let's say access to arms are better off than those people who are very vulnerable because lack of any kind of support.
Marcus?
Could I come in on that? I mean, we are talking now about the natural factors, the periodical drought. You already mentioned the man-made factors involved, and you named a couple of Somali actors, but I would actually stress that even many external actors, governments, are involved in this crisis, and some, I mean, cynically even, some of the actors who are now providing humanitarian aid have previously been providing arms or have been politically paving the way for military interventions,
Marcus,
which are involved in the creation of this famine, actually.
Before we get into some of those factors, could you just summarize for us the conflict that is occurring in southern Somalia, the civil war, if you will, that is definitely a part of this crisis? When we mentioned the man-made factors on that side, there's the administrative part. We talked about the international response, but there is indeed the armed conflict in southern Somalia that is clearly exacerbating, if not causing, some of this crisis. Tell us about that.
No, this conflict has a very long history, but I would say the decisive part of this rather long history, which is involved in the current disaster, started in 2006, when as a result of some external Ethiopian and American support for Somali warlords in Mogadishu, who were snatching and eliminating terrorist suspects. The Islamic Union of Islamic Courts mobilized its forces and drove the warlords out of Mogadishu and took over power. Then the international community suddenly realized that its previous partners, the warlords, have been, so to say, the wrong guys. The guys who didn't have the strong backing of the ordinary people in Mogadishu. They had the backing of their clan militias, but they didn't have the backing of the ordinary people in Mogadishu and much of southern Somalia. And suddenly you had to deal with a kind of a more or less locally legitimate Islamist force, the Union of Islamic Courts, which is not yet al-Shabab. Al-Shabab was a small part of it.
We've been hearing a lot about al-Shabab.
And then the international community took, I would say, a wrong decision. They said, we don't want to have these guys in power. and we want to get rid of them. There were some talks going on, but also within the Islamic courts, unluckily the extremists gained the upper hand. And then an Ethiopian military intervention, which was supported by the US and which was, tacitly tolerated by the rest of the world, took place. And I would say this, end of 2006, this military intervention with 14,000 Ethiopian troops, with tanks, with airplanes, this intervention marked the beginning of a development which ended now in the disaster. Because it actually gave al-Shabab the legitimacy. They were standing up against the Ethiopian military force, which cooperated with the then transitional federal government under Abdullahi Yusuf, who was a former warlord and a partner of the international community. And just to finish this, and al-Shabab managed to position itself as a kind of a liberator, as a savior of Somali interests. And I was in 2008, 2009 in northern Somalia, where things are much more peaceful and much remote from all this crisis.
We'll talk about
even there
northern Somalia in just a moment.
to tell you how much the legitimacy of al-Shabab was, even there, 1,500 kilometers away from Mogadishu, in a completely different political surrounding, people said, actually, what these guys are doing is correct. We don't want to have the Ethiopians in Mogadishu.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, Marcus, on this point, al-Shabab being a militia force that seems to have a certain amount of cachet among the people in Somalia, and it sounds like not just in southern Somalia, but elsewhere in the country, we keep hearing that the al-Shabab militia, perhaps others as well, are blocking the international aid effort, blocking efforts to try to help the people who are suffering from the famine in Somalia. How can they do that and still retain their legitimacy among the people? This is something I don't quite understand.
I think, it has changed dramatically in the last 12 months, I would say. Al-Shabab managed until mid of 2010 to establish themselves as a kind of government force, without being internationally recognized. But de facto, they were governing large parts of southern Somalia. And in those days, they were doing two things. On the one hand, they were terrorizing parts of the population, yes. On the other hand, they delivered at least basic security, and they were very effectively fighting criminality. So for this, they got legitimacy. But when the war got out of hand and the famine escalated, now people are running away from al-Shabab.
Sebastian, we'll come back to that in just a moment. I wanted to bring Sebastian in here because he has been in the camps talking to the people. Do these people that you talk to there, obviously they're in a desperate state, and they're simply trying to survive at that point and glad that they made it to the camp. Are they concerned about the political situation, or do they talk about the militias and the roles that the militias play?
Well, we did ask, and they said, they what you said basically, that in parts they were providing security, but also they steal their cattle if need be, and so they are, as you say, running away, and they don't want to go back. And the people we talked to, they were saying that. That this one father was saying that he's hoping that in these camps he will have his children will get an education and have all the chances that in Somalia they don't have. So they are, as long as there's no political stability of some sort in Somalia, these people don't want to go back, and they'll stay in these camps because they're afraid.
McConnell, you wanted to
yes,
add something?
I just want to catch up with what Marcus said. First of all, there was some sort of relative stability until 2006, though a short period, which was jeopardized by intervention, which was backed by the U.S. And I just want to limit this international community because in that case it was very a direct interest backed by the U.S. and Ethiopian intervention. So some stability was jeopardized, and it was perhaps the bad guys who were, just creating this stability. So we have here just a favorism, a politics of favorism. And the second thing is, even many local and international NGOs say, yes, we had a problem with these regions governed by or controlled by al-Shabab, but we have access now. And it is the obstacle is the U.S. policy.
Apparently there has been a change recently, in just the past couple of weeks, I understand from my perspective sitting here in comfortable Europe reading the news cables from there, but it sounds as if the al-Shabab militia has now relented a bit and they're allowing some aid organizations in. To what degree does al-Shabab and maybe other militias in the country siphon off international aid that is going into Somalia and to the neighboring regions, because when people donate money to that, or the UN is putting money into that region, of course we want as much of it as possible to get to the people who need it, but there's a concern that it may be siphoned off by corrupt officials and simply robbed by militias. How much of that is going on there?
Well, there is a lot of corruption, of course, and this is not new. It's not just 2011, but it has been happening all the years back to in 2010, 2009, etc. And there is, just they instrumentalize crisis, they instrumentalize aid, etc. But on the other side, we have also double standard. On the side of the international community, just favoring certain regions for political reasons. So we have this problem of favoring one region against the other because controlled by, just the wrong guys. And al-Shabab has been an obstacle for the security anyway, all the time through. But what's the alternative? What are the options? And we need now to tackle all these, just homework should be first of all done by the Somalis. But the international community should just look into doing, not tapping into the problem of double standard, favoring one region against the other because it's controlled by the wrong guys.
Okay, this is obviously a very complex situation, and it's not just happened over the last year or so. This goes back for decades. Many have the impression that Somalia is essentially a failed state. But Somalia, as you know, Marcus, having worked very much on this issue of what's happening in northern Somalia, also does have pockets of stability. The former German ambassador to the region has been working on this particular issue and looking at possible models elsewhere in the country.
Walter Lindner is not your average diplomat. When he served as Germany's ambassador to Kenya, he regularly visited camps for Somali refugees. Now he's back at the German Foreign Ministry in Berlin, working on a strategy for the Horn of Africa as a whole. The fundamental issue for Lindner is the security situation. Searching for alternatives to the anarchy and violence in Somalia, he sees hope in promoting peaceful regions in the north, where tribal clans are not fighting each other. Pockets of peace that could serve as a model for the rest of the country.
Somaliland and potentially Puntland demonstrate that there are indeed alternatives in Somalia. These sections of the country are considerably better off than southern Somalia.
Marcus, you wrote your dissertation on northern Somalia. Can the peace there, the relative stability, let's put it that way, in northern Somalia be replicated in the south? Could it serve as a model?
It couldn't be replicated one-to-one, but there are some interesting lessons to learn from northern Somalia. And I would say the first and maybe the most important lesson is that things have been rebuilt there in the absence of international intervention and also in the absence of massive external aid. If we look at the whole process which led to the formation and stabilization of Somaliland in the northwest and Puntland in the northeast, we see that it was a long, open process based on local Somali traditions. The actors who made peace were actually Somali traditional authorities, guerrillas, religious authorities, intellectuals, without external roadmaps, without external expertise. And then the actors, after peace was made, the actors who started to economically invest and rebuild the countries were Somali diaspora guys who said, okay, we have still our family back in northern Somalia. We want to rebuild the houses which have been destroyed in the civil war. We want to start new businesses and to create some income. So you can say the whole 90s was actually a period where northern Somalia was out of international focus. All the international intervention was in the south in the early 90s, and then Somalia as a whole was kind of considered a failed state and let's not do anything about it. And this was the time when northern Somalia became peaceful and actually rather successful in certain perspectives, like economically there was a lot going on, and even there is kind of democratic transition taking place without anybody outside saying you have to do that.
Are you saying then that it would be better if the international community just pulled out and left Somalia to its own devices?
To some degree, not regarding international aid when it's needed, but regarding political the building of political structures, I would say yes. Let Somalis do, actually. Let Somalis do and find their own way in the south. There is no alternative to that. Because all the interventions which have been taken place since 1991 have actually led to more disaster, the political interventions. I'm not talking about the humanitarian aid. This has to be delivered when people are starving, when children are malnourished. We have to do something about it. But I say politically, let's keep a little bit, let's back off. But then you also have to say the problem is not only Somalia, it's also bad neighborhood. It's also Ethiopia, it's also Eritrea, and it's partly also Kenya, who play all kinds of political games within Somalia without making it very public. So if you talk about a solution, a political solution for Somalia, it's not only an external intervention force which should better not enter or which has to go out, but it's also the international community, the Security Council, who has to watch over Kenya, over Ethiopia, over Eritrea, and say, you know what, guys, this is a failed state, but it still has a limited sovereignty. So let's not, you are not, we watch you, what you are doing. If you give arms to this and that warlord because he is your partner and he causes havoc among civilians in southern Somalia, you will be responsible for that.
Sebastian, the people you talked to there, what did they say that they would like to happen in order to improve their plight? Obviously, the people you talked to want water and food and safety and security, but what do they say would help their situation back home?
Well, they said that they would like to live in a safe environment, obviously, and an environment that at the moment they don't have. And if you look at the situation, as the aid agencies said before, the problems they're having when they're trying to distribute food in these regions, there's looting going on, and there's the World Food Program even spoke of riots breaking out when they're trying to deliver food. So you can see it's a situation which is very precarious for the people who live there, and obviously they want stability. They want to live their lives, and in order to return, definitely they want stability there.
Sure.
And I think many of those refugees in those refugee camps are staying for a decade. So it's not only just newcomers, new arrivals, but many are living for many years, and partly for over a decade. So it's just a chronic problem.
A chronic problem that you described in the Horn of Africa, and it's not just Somalia. Ethiopia, Kenya, Eritrea also being affected. But is there now a pattern of dependency that is there any potential of breaking out of this pattern of dependency, Megan?
Well, first of all, what Mark's just mentioned, what's happening in Puntland and Somaliland, it's something which needs to be followed up with support, at least a political and diplomatic support.
He described that as happening basically in a vacuum, that if you leave the people to their own devices, they'll sort it out themselves.
I know. There are some voices in Somalia who say this is an opportunity. This crisis is an opportunity. Either, just it would explode, or on the other side, just the international community would even intervene massively. So there would be a kind of solution. So
is there support for that developing? For a possible intervention, a military intervention to try to restore? This has happened. This has been tried before, has it?
All interventions failed in Somalia. So I don't see any solution in a militaristic solution, and interventions done by the regional powers or by international powers, everything failed. So I think the solution may be, just either they concentrate on reconciliation, just putting together all the local know-how and local resources, just sitting together and resolving the problem. The other thing is a kind of self-reliance policy. We know that in the last months, the situation in Eritrea has been discussed, that the government would deny and so on and so on. But I think there are some patterns of managing drought. So there had been a discussion whether the government is denying, for example, international aid to needy people, etc., etc. But the drought is not so severe as it has been discussed. But there had been done some homeworks, though we have, just a problematic governance and so on. So I think governance and having a strategy to deal with that is absolutely critical.
Marcus, do you see a strategy?
Yeah, I see. I mean, governance is critical, but there is also governance without government, so to say. Yeah, I mean, and what you have in Somalia, even in the south, if you have de facto actors who de facto act as government, yeah, and some of them are nicer, and some of them are not so nice. Some of them are better in watching over civilian needs, and some of them just follow a military strategy. And the problem now is, and this is really different from northern Somalia, now you have many actors who are absolutely not acceptable for the West. So now, since more than 10 years, you have political Islamists in southern Somalia who first followed a civilian strategy or a non-military strategy, but in context of external interventions became now fully militarized, and now you have, so to say, actors who just, they will not vanish. Even if al-Shabab is military defeated tomorrow, there will still be enough young kids who have the feeling that they have been deprived of all kinds of things and they have a right to take what they want, and they will take a rifle, and now they have even religious, blessing for it if they call themselves mujahideen or if they call themselves jihadists. So this will be a problem for southern Somalia for a long time.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, Marcus, or I'm afraid we're out of time. Marcus Hernes, Bastian Hartig, Mekonnen Mesgina, I want to thank you all for being with us here. I want to thank you for tuning in. You can find out a lot more about this story on our website. That's dwworld.de. Hope you'll join us again next week on Quadriga.